The Lions have won the Test series in Australia. Andy Farrell's men secured a last gasp 29 points to 26 victory over Joe Schmidt's Wallaby side, who brought a hell of a lot more than they did in Test 1 in Brisbane. Hugo Keenan was the hero with his last second try, but I think it was the game the series needed and that the Lions tour needed generally, because there had been a lot of questions going into this game about how kind of good this tour was, but this game had it all and then some. Will Slattery here with you, delighted to be joined by Cian, Tracey, and our man in the MCG, Rory O'Connor. But first, a reminder that our rugby coverage on the Indo Sport podcast is brought to you by Energia. Energia sponsors rugby in Ireland at all levels, at grassroots with the Energia AIL, and as official energy partner to Leinster, Connacht, and the Irish men's and women's teams. The Energia Rugby for All initiative supports inclusion, welcoming everyone of all abilities to participate in the game. To learn more about Energia's rugby partnerships and find out about their inclusive home energy offer for rugby fans, you can visit energia.ie/rugby. Rud, what a game we had. It was everything the first test wasn't from the off. Australia brought it. We knew Will Skelton and Rob Valentini were going to be key additions, and so it proved. They ended up going into a 23 points to 5 lead after 32 minutes, which no one would have foresaw. The Lions then got those two tries before half-time to really change the complexion of the second half, which then turned into a really tense, tight arm wrestle, kind of reminiscent maybe of the Lions versus the All Blacks and some of the end games there. Ultimately, Hugo Keenan squeezes over with the clock in the red. They check that late clear on Jock Morgan, and the Lions win only their second Test series since South Africa in 1997. What are your thoughts after that?
Where do you start? You're right. It's everything that we wanted from today. Everything. An absolutely, properly epic game of rugby. Two teams. Both teams turned up in a way that didn't happen last week. Australia were a different animal. I expected this. I heard some people talk about 50-point win for the Lions this week. Test series don't work that way. The second test of any series is always a completely different animal to the first. And Australia may not be the force they once were, but there's still a lot of good rugby players, and there's still a lot of pride here. And they were never going to roll over on their own patch. They were always going to turn up and perform. And Joe Schmidt, brought in two major power athletes from the start, and he had Langy Gleeson on the bench. And all three of them made a huge difference. And the Lions look stunned because when you hear Maro Itoje yesterday saying, or on Thursday saying, we're not playing against the pub team here, once you start to use the terminology like that, you can tell that they're hearing all this stuff. Like they know that everyone's writing off Australia. And no matter how professional you are and how well prepared you are, that stuff, when you go through an 80 minutes like last weekend, it does lull you into a false sense of security to some degree. And they turned up looking like they just had to turn up. And they didn't. Like, that wasn't going to be enough. Australia changed the picture. They were far tighter in every area. They were powerful. They were nuggety. Skelton was causing hassle. And they gave the Lions a problem to solve. And I think what the Lions will be so happy with was they solved it. It took them 9 minutes to get there, but they came up with the plays when they needed them. They stayed patient. They didn't panic. They worked their way into position. They got on top. Their bench made an impact. And, what a fairy tale for Hugo Keenan, who wasn't having a very good tour a couple of weeks ago. Lost 6 kilos with a stomach bug. And here he is, like even this time last year, he was at the Olympics. It didn't go for him. And now here he is scoring the winning try in a Lions series decider. Like that, this is the kind of stuff. He'll be back here in Australia in 12 years' time, dining out on that try. 24 years' time, he'll be back dining out on that try, wherever they are. He will always be the guy who scored the try and won the series. And that's a moment in Lions history. And yes, it's not been the best tour. And yes, Australia are not the strongest hosts they've ever overcome. But today almost gave this Lions series legitimacy because it was such a good game. And that's really important. And yeah, it's a game that saved the tour, and it's a pity almost we're not going to that series decider in Sydney next week, because that would be an epic thing to build up towards. But the way they won it just made, and how exciting the game was, and even the bit of drama with Piardi looking up at making the correct call on Tizano's clear out on Jack Morgan, it had everything. Because like even in the stadium, you're like, who's going to drop the goal? Is it going to be Owen Farrell or Finn Russell or Blair Kinghorn? and none of them went into the position to drop the goal. They were so convinced they'd score a try, even though they didn't need to score a try. It was magic. It was magic, and 90,000 people just got over the 90,000 mark. Like, you can kind of diminish the Lions, or you can kind of talk about its place in the world and how the series hasn't really taken off in terms of back home. But like, I'm just looking at the amount of people in red jerseys who are here watching the Lions do a lap of honour, the people who live over here, the people who've travelled over, the Wallaby fans who rallied to come to a game in a city where rugby is dead. I don't think you can turn your nose up at that. This has been a significant day, and it was the test match lived up to the stadium and the venue that it was and the stakes, and it gave us exactly what you want out of a Lions tour.
Yeah, I really agree with the point about the second test kind of validating the achievement. I think people might even look back at 2009 as a whole with rose-tinted glasses. It's the second test that really was the legitimate moment there too. The first test actually was very similar to the first test last weekend. The South Africans had a huge lead. Lions pared them back. Likewise last weekend. I think we're going to look back on this tour, and this is going to be what our touchstone is. I think that's what we'll be talking about in the years to come, this absolutely epic test match that just delivered in spades. And like, you're watching the scenes here, I'm on my TV in front of me, James Ryan hugging his father, a lot of the Irish players got families here. And we were kind of almost thinking, at a 2-0 victory, what would it be like? Would they be celebrating, but would it feel like a big moment? I really think it does after that great game. Great to see Rudd has his binoculars back from last week.
I'm trying to see Hugo Keenan, the hero of the hour, has something around his neck. It's like a Hawaiian. Is it a leia they call them?
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Bigger, and it's bigger, and it's red and white. So he's enjoying his moment. I don't know what it doesn't really sit well on his shoulders, but I guess when he scored a winning try in a test match. But yeah, like this was always going to matter more to the player. Like, they couldn't go around here saying like Australia are being no good and this doesn't matter. Like, they've invested too much time and effort into it. They were always going to enjoy it. But I think even like Johnny Sexton in Paris that time, like, anytime you win at the death, it's a different feeling. It makes this game special. Like, they didn't lead for 79 minutes. They were in all sorts of bother when Tommy Freeman was in the bin and they were conceding 2 tries on the trot. To come back from, like, I was talking to some of the colleagues here, like, it's a team stacked full of Irish players. Ireland are not usually quite that good at coming back. When a team gets that far ahead of Ireland or Leinster, they often struggle to get back. And I thought the game reminded me a little bit of Leinster Northampton in that they kind of got themselves back into the position to kind of, and they're never close enough. And obviously this isn't Leinster, this isn't Ireland, and you have Maro Itoje making big plays, turning over a maul. You've Ellis Genge punching big carries, and the Lions had a better bench. But like, Bundy Aki was cramping up for the last 15 minutes of the game, but he makes a big carry in the sequence that leads up to the try, if I remember it correctly. Like, I was worried about that partnership with him and Owen Farrell. Farrell played 80 minutes on Tuesday. Aki was cramping up. The last time I saw Aki play a 13 was in Rome, and Italy shredded Ireland. But the Australians, there was one time they had the ball in their own 22 and they had a massive overlap. And if they'd been brave, and it's a hard call to make because it's in the last throes of a test match, but they box kicked and they gave the ball away. But if they flashed it wide, there was so much space on that side, because Finn Russell's work in the backfield was really weird. He was kind of over beside Keenan. There was a try on. It would have been a length of the field job, and it's a big call to criticise them on it. But instead, they tried to play the percentages, and they weren't good enough to see it out. And you could see they were absolutely crushed at the death.
Cian, what are your thoughts? So much to pick through, like the kind of the ferocity of the Australian first half performance, or the first 30 minutes anyway. Like, looking up at the scoreboard, it's like 23-5 is not on the bingo card in any way, shape, or form. Like, how do you make sense of the 80 minutes? It was such an epic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this was the week, actually, not just today. Obviously, today will be the standout game that we'll remember. But even in terms of the midweek game that we had, it felt like this was the week that the 2025 Lions Tour really came alive. And yeah, look, on paper, the Lions win the series 2-0. They might well, they're odds on to go on and win it 3-0. But I think the manner of Australia's performance today will shape the complexion of how we'll end up looking back on this series. Because on paper, if it's 3-0, you'd probably say it was fairly handy, but it was anything but today. And I thought, obviously we'll get on and talk about the Lions and get into the nitty gritty, but you have to give so much credit to Joe Schmidt in Australia. They came in for a lot of justified criticism, I would say, across the course of the week. You just saw the difference that Rob Valentini, Will Skelton, Langy Gleeson coming off the bench made. The fact that the decision to go 6-2 on the bench pretty much backfired on paper, but credit to Tate McDermott. He slotted in so well. I was getting flashbacks of Kieran Marmie, and I'm sure Joe Schmidt was as well. But I was really surprised that the Lions weren't able to sort of expose him more often on the wing. And I think that was a credit to how well Australia played. I thought the Lions' discipline was really poor in that first half. I think they coughed up 6 penalties. But again, that was down to the pressure that the Wallabies put on. Obviously, Valentini coming off at half time, Skelton coming off after 47 minutes. Clearly, they weren't fully fit. And, whatever, like I think a lot of us would have hoped to have seen the two of them start in the first test, but the fact they came off so early suggests that they weren't ready to play in that first test. But look at the impact that they made. It's a pity that they weren't fit for the full thing. So I think Australia deserve a lot of credit, because there was, existential crisis in Australian rugby. And while I don't think this necessarily cures all their ills, the amount of people that will be watching the game today, Rudd's there, 93,000 people, I think you can't but be inspired by that kind of performance. So huge credit to the Wallabies, but for the Lions to come back in the manner that they did. The Wallabies scored 17 unanswered points in the first half, and then the Lions responded with 12 unanswered points. Utterly remarkable. I think it was always going to be difficult for that sort of pace and intensity to keep up into the second half. And Rudd's right. Ronan O'Gara was having a conniption in the commentary box at no dropping back into the pocket to go for the drop goal. But to be fair, the Lions backed their skills. And I do agree, Rudd, you touched on it there. I think when Piardi went to the TMO, and I picked up on it at the time because obviously Tizzano kind of made a meal of it. And when I remember who the referee was, I was kind of thinking, God, there's a good chance that this is going to go in the home side's favour. And I think it would have been an easier call to kind of go with the hometown decision, keep the series alive. But I think it was the right call, absolutely right call, that Jack Morgan. I'm not sure what else he could have done there.
Well, to be fair,
I think Piardi had a really good game. I was there was loads of worry in both camps about Piardi, because he has been an inconsistent ref, and we've seen some wild stuff from him over the course of the year. But I don't think he was a factor in the game at all. He whistled the Lions off the pitch in the first half, but they deserved it, because they were like chasing everything. They were panicking. They were desperate. I thought he dealt with the kind of the stuff at the start of the game pretty well. He kind of could, he had a good word with. He probably could have sin-binned Will Skelton for the cheap shot on Tyke Furlong, but like it's kind of what you want to see, is a bit of biff, like a bit of. It's been, Joe Schmidt said they were submissive last week. Well, they were anything but this week, and it was the Lions who were submissive in that first half. It's just a pity the Wallabies didn't show this last week, and we didn't have 3 games like this, because it took that 80 minutes to get a performance like that in it, and it was too little too late, and they didn't have the depth to get it across the line. I know they were missing bodies last week, but even the other guys who, not Valentini and Skelton, other players stepped up and won collisions, and they got Sueli into the game far more frequently than they had done a week before. So that's the shame of it from an Australian point of view. It's too little too late, and I'd say Joe Schmidt's also having flashbacks to 2013 when the All Blacks came back and beat Ireland at the death, because it was, he put together a really good game plan and got his team ahead. But I think from an Irish point of view, just seeing Andrew Porter down there with a tricolour, like, what a night for Irish rugby. A Lions team with 9 Irish starters, with the Ireland coach, a backroom team stacked with Irish coaches, loads of Irish fans here. The Fields of Battenry was ringing around early in the second half. James Ryan came on and had a significant impact off the bench. For Leinster and for Ireland, their contribution to the Lions, like, this may never happen again, that Ireland will have this much impact on a Lions series win anywhere, or a Lions tour. And I guarantee you that the Lions were out if this had gone wrong, and they pulled it out of the fire. And people have wondered what this, is this a good or a bad thing for Irish rugby that there's so much gone into this Lions? Well, I think the players, Hugo Keenan and his teammates, Like Dan Cian went to another level today, or well, went back to the level that we've seen so many times. But this experience will stand to them in the next year or two. Like this will be something that they will be able to go back to in 2027 when they're back here in Melbourne, probably playing a World Cup game. So I think we have to acknowledge that significance from an Irish point of view as an Irish podcast. Like this is unprecedented for Irish rugby to contribute to a line series win like this.
Yeah, and obviously Hugo Keenan being interviewed now by Will Greenwood on Sky, getting over for the winning try. There's a couple of things to spin through. Yeah, you mentioned the knives would have been out. Yeah, 23-5. I was imagining going onto the Telegraph homepage and what the spread of articles was going to be from their perspective. You mentioned Joe Schmidt. The bus being late. Oh, my God. I was just like, this is just too funny. And the Sky interview was gold. Like, she asked him a completely unrelated question. He was just like, the bus was late. And just like segued straight into it.
I thought she very skillfully used the word drive in her question. And he just couldn't help but bite. But in fairness, I saw Joe, the first thing he did, he bounded onto the pitch, right up to Johnny Sexton, gave him a big hug, big smile. Like, they keep telling us here that he has changed and he doesn't sweat the small stuff as much. And I think my impression of him is that he has kind of chilled out a little bit, because it certainly didn't affect Australia's performance in the way that it did in 2017.
He looked angry in that interview. I have to disagree. He had a kind of haunted look. He couldn't wait to get the words "bus" out of his mouth. Will is right. The question hadn't even been asked.
Well, to be fair, 20 minutes late on home soil is ridiculous. Like if the Irish team were 20 minutes late getting to the Aviva, we'd be wondering who's driving that bus. Like,
as I said to Rod, I was texting Rod because I wasn't sure if he had heard about it in the stadium. Just to let him know, and I thought, who'd have thought it? 100,000 capacity stadium and there's traffic outside. Do you think that the locals would know about it, especially for?
There's an overpass outside the stadium, and we saw like 4 police motorbikes, 6 police cars escorting a load of kind of massive SUVs into the stadium. So a lot of VIPs got a big police escort from the city into the stadium, and it's not far. Like, it's a half an hour walk from the city to the stadium. So I presume the Wallabies had the same treatment. So I don't understand how you could be late. Like, Ireland were late to the third test in 2018. The bus was stuck. And I remember Schmidt leading the team across the pitch in Sydney with an absolute, like, he looked like someone had punched his mother. Like, it was just, he was so furious about it. But yeah, like, genuinely, he came in with a big smile on his face. I know he mentioned it in the interview, but it didn't look like it affected the team performance anyway, because they started like an absolute train.
Yeah, just one or two other things to mention. Like, Cian, you touched on the Piatti moment. Tazzano really took a dive there. Like, it actually, like, he really was clutching his head like he'd been struck with a bat. Like, I thought like Morgan, actually, it was a good clear out. Piatti, you mentioned, like, it reminded me of the La Rochelle Munster game when there was the baying mob and he actually, like, kind of stayed. Although that one was a lot more contentious, I thought. So, but he stayed kind of, he didn't get swayed by the crowd. You mentioned Raj on the commentary. It was a very funny moment seeing the Lions in a very similar position to Leinster versus La Rochelle. And then having the La Rochelle coach talking about the need to take a drop goal. I was just like, this is just, there's something going on here. I just can't quite make sense of all these like kind of things happening at once.
But it shows the fine margins, Will, doesn't it? Because like I said, like the Lions backed their skills there. And look, and obviously you want to remember Hugo Keenan has written himself into folklore. But if they somehow butcher that and they didn't even attempt to go for the drop goal, these are the conversations that, like you just said, we've been having all along.
Finn Russell almost got caught in possession. He just before the Morgan clear out, he offloaded the ball to, I think, James Ryan, which precipitated the clear out. Like, he almost got caught in possession. And Cian, like, I suppose there was so many moments. There's 2 moments that stand out for me in this game. One is Finn Russell's outrageous line kick just before halftime, where, you know, what are they down? It was 23-10 at that stage. You're thinking you get in at halftime 13 down. All of a sudden, you have a 5-meter line out from a penalty you get inside your own half. Like, that was a huge moment. And then Tom Curry's try saver as well. There was 9 points in the game at that stage. Australia are almost certainly to score if he doesn't make that. And it reminded me of Heathcliff's tackle on Hogg, just kind of getting in and snagging the arm, you know, all those years ago in Murrayfield. That was a humongous moment. I think it was one of his last acts before he was called ashore. Like, they were such momentum swings, and there was probably a whole host of other ones that I'm forgetting.
Yeah, like I've written down 3 key moments, Will, and you've picked out 2 of them there, because Finn Russell had a brilliant line kick in the second half as well, and that Curry tackle stopped an absolute certain try. The wide angle really gives you an idea of that. It was a sensational tackle, and it was the last act before he got replaced. That was on 54 minutes. But I thought on 45 minutes, Hugo Keenan, to keep the ball from going into touch for it to be a 50-22, is another low-key, massive moment in the game, because if the Wallabies get a line out there, you could be talking about a different result. So for Hugo Keenan to have spent the first part of the tour on the Jacks, to have that really good moment there, and then come up with the match-winning try, because he probably didn't have it all his own way throughout the game. I think a couple of drop balls, I think he'll be frustrated with. Obviously, he had that moment for the Max Jorgensen try last week, but that all kind of gets forgotten about now because of what he did at the end. I thought the bench were excellent as well. Rudd touched and you did as well, James Ryan. Look, he'll be frustrated with the penalty that he gave away close to the line. It looked like Ty Byrne actually might have been taken out off the ball. I think that's what Maro Itoje was saying to Piardi, but he didn't want to hear anything about it. But James Ryan was an absolute savage in defence. The ferocity of his hits, the quality of his hits. He made one double tackle in the space of, it was about 30 seconds near the end of the game. Absolutely outstanding. And he's a guy who I think a lot of people outside of Ireland, probably maybe some Irish fans as well, were pretty critical of his selection this week, but I wasn't surprised at all. It was a classic Andy Farrell type selection. Like James Ryan has delivered so often for Farrell in the past, and he played like a man with a point to prove when he came on. He looked like he was really assured at the line out as well. I thought he was excellent.
Yeah, Rudd, I know you have to run off to talk to Andy Farrell, so I'll just give you one more question. Myself and Cian might continue on. Any last kind of thoughts of things that jumped out to you before we let you go?
Yeah, I think the Keenan moment was big. I think Jemison Gibson Park chasing back to get that chip ahead and then staying strong in contact and not getting turned over. That big moment, because the Wallabies did manage to put a lot of pressure on the Lions in that second half, but I think they only scored 3 points after half time, which, you know, even though Lange Gleeson came off the bench and was, you know, he was almost as good as Valentini. It is a pity that they couldn't get more out of Valentini and Skelton from their point of view. Like, if Valentini had 40 minutes in him, you know, they had Ben Donaldson on the bench and never brought him on, which I thought was a really strange thing. You know, in this day and age, I'm just not sure about what's the point in having a sub if you're not going to have him on at all. Overall, I think it's very impressive the way that the Lions team stay calm and were able to build their own momentum from a position where they could easily have sacked it off, because they have another chance next week. This wasn't do or die for them. So, you know, what was it? When they were so far behind them towards the end of the first half, they could easily have gone into their shells and, you know, we could have had a bit of a nothing second half, but they didn't. They dug in, they built the score their own way, and they hung in there till the death. And I think that's to their credit, because I think we'd all be they should be criticised for the way they started the game, but they problem solved their way out of it. And I guess the abundance of resources that they have, picking from four nations, being able to bring on the Welsh captain, bring on Ellis Genge, who's captain England, you know, all the players who come off the bench are massively experienced, whereas Australia are not bringing on players of the same calibre, and it's hold in the end. But to stay calm and win it the way they did, look, they're still out there down with their families in the corner. They're enjoying this moment, and they deserve it because they've earned it. And this is way more satisfying for everyone than if they turned up and hammered Australia for the second week in a row. It's they kind of won it in a reverse way they did last week, and that's a far more enjoyable thing to do. And it's, as we said at the start, it's going to live far longer in the memory as a result of the way that they did it.
Cheers, Ro. Nice that we're on the same page this week after the final whistle. You can go off and chat to Andy Farrell, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, lads. Talk soon.
Thanks, Rod.